Let's start from the Nigerian oil and gas sector, where we've been recording declines in production from oil down to gas. And if you follow the Nigerian oil and gas sector through, you know that we'll deal more with associated gas, which means with declining production in oil, there will also be declining production in gas. And now the country is not even getting enough revenue from gas because the exportation is also dropping. So what do you think why we're having this development in the country?
So first of all, I think I'll just give your listeners a sense of where I sit in industry and what my company Horizon Engage does. So I am the director for our Sub-Saharan Africa practice, and we are a political risk analysis firm that offers energy companies stakeholder intelligence in emerging markets. And I have the great pleasure and privilege of leading our Nigeria research. So I'm watching the Nigerian energy industry fairly closely, and we deal with a number of operators who are active in Nigerian industry. So if I'm thinking about a question, it's obviously a big question, and there's a lot of different facets to the answer. Number one, no secret, of course, is security. The security issues that have affected production in the Niger Delta for a very long time now. And we've really seen the impact of that on crude and gas output for the last 2.5 years at a very high level that we know has denied Nigeria an awful lot of money. So it's the security piece. And secondly, it's the investment piece, that you need to see investment into these assets to be maximizing what they can do. And Nigeria is at a moment of transition. We're in this period where the IOCs or IECs, as we are starting to call them, are looking at their Nigerian asset portfolios and they're thinking, how do these fit with our strategic objectives? And we know from the deals that are on the table that for the most part, they're leaving the onshore and they're leaving the shallow water. And while they're waiting for these processes to be approved, some of them are not necessarily investing in assets that sooner or later will belong to a different company. So I am hopeful that as these divestments are approved and as those assets are transferred to their new owners, to Seplat or to Renaissance or to Chapal, then we might see some increase in those numbers. I think one thing I want to be very, very clear about in this conversation is that you and I both see a lot of headlines about the IOC departures as if this is some kind of permanently closed door or some kind of apocalypse moment, like, oh, they're going and they're not coming back, or they've exited entirely. And that's not reflective of the position. It's not an accurate representation. Just in the last week, we've seen Total Energies take a significant FID on the Ubata gas project. I think a few days ago, we saw ExxonMobil committing to a long-term future in the deep water in Nigeria. We know that Shell is committed to Nigeria long-term, not just on oil and gas, but also on the renewable side. So it's really, really important that we're not too pessimistic about these departures, and instead we recognize that these companies are just shifting their position. They're not fleeing Nigeria. I think that's the word that's used.
All right. I get that Total Energies, ExxonMobil, and the like, bringing some sort of investment into the country. And if you look at the NUPRC, there is an ongoing pre-bid on oil blocks for investors to come in and probably ramp up production in the country. But you also look at the fact that as a country that we're having issues on insecurities, we have an issue with infrastructures and everything in between. We are still flaring gas. If you look at the recent data from the World Bank, Nigeria is in the top 10, number 8 to be precise, with over 200 billion cubic meters of gas flared in 2023. So again, what do you think we can do? Okay, now we're talking about bringing investments in, but we are also being wasteful, we're wasting our resources. So what do you think we can do? How do we navigate this to bring some sort of, how do I put it, to help us in ramping up production? So if you're not getting enough investment, at least the one that you have, you should be able to maintain it, be efficient and effective with with the process of getting all these things. So my question is, how do we then find a way to curb the issue of gas flaring? And on the other hand, oil spill. If you look at, I think this last week, we also have an oil spill from ATO.
ITO spill.
Yeah. So how do we work around all this, being able to curb wastage and also move the country forward in terms of production and exportation?
So this is a conversation that you've been having, I've been having, we've all been having for such a long time around gas flaring. I remember when I was living in Abuja in 2013, I had friends then who were doing very advanced programs on how to map gas flaring and how to try and shift the picture there so that there would be some benefit from the gas, more benefit from the gas. And obviously it's a huge challenge and a great sadness that there were 10 years where really it doesn't feel like there was very much progress on that front. When I look at what the government is doing now, and when I say government, would be referring to the president's special advisor on energy, Mrs. Bahayan, and to engineer Commission Chief Executive Fumalake. I think that the efforts they are making and the things that they're attempting to do in industry are promising. They are positive. They are exciting, particularly with reference to the 3 executive orders that the president signed in February. And within those 3, the specific provision for non-associated gas. So the direction in which government is going is definitely correct and definitely positive. The big challenge now is moving it from something that's happening on paper and something that's happening in conversations to something that's executed and implemented in industry. So really we're watching now to see what that implementation process looks like, how much energy is there behind that implementation process. And if we're thinking about the gas flaring, thinking about the oil spills, that, as you know, is not something that can always respond to a regulatory change. You need to have an entire change on the ground. You need to address difficulties in host communities as well. We need to have extremely good liaison with the host communities. That's a very, very complex picture that demands very considerate stakeholder management, and it's made much more difficult in the kind of economy that Nigeria has today. My hope is, in terms of oil spill, or in terms of oil theft, or in terms of pipeline vandalism, that some of these will stabilize or regulate as the economy improves.
Okay. I'm glad to hear you talk. It makes sense. Moving on. If you come up for Nigeria now, we'll go global now, and we'll look at.
Oh no, let's stay in Niger.
Okay, we'll stay for Nigeria small, yeah.
I always want to stay in Niger. My boss sometimes will vex me, say, please don't just talk about Nigeria. I say, what can I do? It's really interesting and I like talking about it.
Yeah.
And anyway, no, Olga, just please, we can talk global if you like.
Yeah. Say if you don't stay for Nigeria for a while, get this kind of feel where you get. So you must always talk about Nigeria. All right, so before we go global, let's talk about Dangote Refinery and the IOCs or IECs, as the case may be. And in the past week, there was a report that the IOCs are not making operation very, very smoothly for the refinery. In the case of getting crude, and also There's also a report today about the NNPC not giving the 300,000 crude barrels of crude, promised to the refinery, and all this encompassed together, is not making the operation of the Dangote Refinery go smoothly. So what is your view of this? What do you think is the cause of this, and what will be your expert opinion on the way forward?
Okay, so obviously this is a fairly sensitive topic, and we have tensions running quite high between Dangote Group, the IECs, the NNDPRA, and tempers, particularly between Dangote Group and the regulator, seem to be running quite hot. So let me not add to that. I will just try and give you a calm outsider perspective on it. The big missing piece in this puzzle is the NNPC contribution to the refinery. And I saw Deepo's piece today in Business Day. And I think the Business Day analysis was correct, that industry had planned for NNPC to be contributing 300,000 barrels a day per the agreement that Mele Kyari was discussing, I think around a year ago, maybe May 2023. And that's what industry had anticipated for this refinery. And it now seems from the available data that NNPC is supplying on a more sporadic basis, perhaps, rather than this consistent 300. And I am not sure why the IOCs are the ones who are now being told that they are falling short. It would be really, really good to hear some very clear, very crystallized information from the NNPC about exactly what it is and is not supplying to the refinery. As a side note as well, I think it's really important to consider the way in which oil producers sell their crude, and the fact that lots of them have very long-standing commercial agreements in place. So you might have, I think in Business Day today, there was the mention of a 5 to 7 year contract. And what are you supposed to do with a very, very long-standing contract when you have a refinery that starts up and then the refinery is saying, hi, we would like a certain amount of that crude as well. Where are you supposed to put that contract? How are you supposed to handle your other counterparty or your very long-standing commercial relationship for a new counterparty that has turned up? Of course, sitting alongside all of this is the upstream regulator, the NUPRC's Domestic Crude Supply Obligation Framework. And again, of course, we can all say it makes sense that if you have a lot of local crude production and you have an economy that badly needs domestically produced petrol, 2 + 2 = 4. The implementation of that framework is really important. It has to be done with understanding of the producer's existing commercial arrangements. And it has to be done in a timely fashion so that there is not interruption that could cause further friction. Let me put it that way. But for me, the bottom line here is that Nigeria needs cheaper petrol, and the Nigerian government needs to be able to end the subsidy program. And in order to get there, there has to be cooperation, not conflict. And there has to be cooperation from the upstream to the midstream to the downstream, between the producers, the regulators, the end user. And really that's the direction that this should all be going in. And it's a shame to see that there is at the moment clearly some friction between different parties.
Okay, you've practically touched my next question, and you've done make justice to the question I asked you. We've talked about Dangote Refinery, we've talked about oil and gas declining and depleting. We talked about the infrastructural deficits, and I would like to take us back a little bit to gas. There's the AKK pipeline, there is the Sub-Saharan pipeline, there is the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline. and a host of other pipelines. And it's like we are coming a little bit late into the party, Now that there's a Russia and Ukraine war, there's a Iran issues, there's a whole lot of geopolitical factors affecting crude markets today. Nigeria and the rest of Africa, per se, are like they are literally just coming to the party and they are coming late because most of these pipelines will not be coming on stream anytime soon. So how do you see this? It's like a dilemma to me, because some of these pipelines have had their MOU signed 5-10 years ago. Why are we still talking about construction in 2024? What are the issues, the challenges? Okay, there's the COVID-19 from 19 to 20, but we're back online. We're back to living normally to some extent. Some economies are already growing. So what is the issue with Nigeria and Africa in general?
Nika, they start with Niger. I think if we look at a project like AKK, both in Nigeria and then with the plan that eventually it leaves Nigeria and continues across Africa, the number one factor to mention is financing. So where does the financing for a project like AKK come from? And I know the history of that pipeline is that there was some difficulties with funding. The funding existed, then it was partially pulled. Then there was alternative financing, but it really seems to have been, it wasn't the case that the cash was there and the construction happened. It's been a rocky path. And then if you layer on top of that, okay, so AKK eventually goes through Niger. This is the plan if all goes well. And then you look at the year that Nigeria and Niger have had in terms of their relationship. Suddenly you start seeing all kinds of other stumbling blocks. But more generally, for gas projects and gas pipelines in Nigeria, I would say that financing is the number one constraint and the number one concern. And I have so many conversations at the moment with stakeholders, with governments who really want financing for these pipeline projects in order to supply gas to Europe so they can diversify their supply. And the Europeans want this gas, but there seems to be a reluctance to finance the means of getting the gas there, which is, I don't know, if I'm being generous, let's call it ironic. And when I spoke to you recently, I think I mentioned this G7 support for gas projects. So G7 will back development of African gas assets. And, we know that they need that gas. We've known that they need that gas since the EU delegation came to the Niger Delta and had a tour with Temipra Silva, who at the time was the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, and GCEO Mele Kyari. So, why did you then hang around for another 2 years before saying, oh, yes, you can have our blessing to go forwards with these projects? I think on the brighter side, on the promising side, FLNG is an interesting and exciting possibility. And we know in Nigeria of two. So UTM.
UTM offshore. Angola, yeah.
UTM offshore. And Gola, who would like to, or has recently announced an agreement with NNPC around a potential FLNG project. So if all goes well, if God is good, then hopefully both of those things will come off, and that will be a real boost for industry. But you look at all of the gas in Nigeria and the enormous gas wealth of Nigeria, and I think you look at a state like Imo and the amount of gas there is there. I mean, wow, this could be transformative for Europe, but also transformative for local economy. So government really, really needs to just continue the energy that it's shown in terms of improving the regulatory and investment conditions, and just push really, really hard on seamless execution and implementation.
All right, all right. So before I let you go, you've done justice to all the question I've got for you today. But we're still going to talk about the global, the global trend. From Nigeria to Africa, these are all subset of a set. Yes, to the globe, the world generally. How do you see the oil and gas markets in coming months, coming days? Your prediction,
Oh my goodness. Okay, all right. My prediction for the global oil and gas market. So does anyone have a prediction for the global oil and gas market? I think what we're seeing now is increased recognition of the important role that gas has in a just energy transition, more recognition of that globally, more realism around the pace of change. We all recognize the threat that climate change poses. We all recognize that we cannot switch off oil and gas overnight. And there is an increasing and very valuable recognition that Africa, more than anywhere else, cannot be forced to switch off its own lights before it's even had a chance to switch them on.
All right, all right. So go see go because when should we be expecting you back in the country? You're supposed to start shopping Corby and all those things.
Hold on, I know. So my visa don't expire quite soon. So I need to go and see my friends at the NIS. And then I'll be in Lagos before you can blink your eyes. But I'm very, very much looking forward to my next trip and to seeing friends, to having some beers, to having some suya, and most importantly, to having some strong gist.
It makes sense like that because we guys give you one Nigerian name still because we just come and go like that. Or do you have one already?
Of course, I have one already. All of this time, so many different names from so many different friends. But it depends. I have different names from different friends across the country.
Okay, so I think it would be best fit to give you Folake or something. Yeah, Folake should be okay.
Folake is one of my favorites. So my all-time favorite Yoruba name is Folashade. So I will always be very grateful if I can be a Folashade, but Folake is also beautiful.
Nice, awesome. So hopefully, when we call you next time, you will be answering our call. Because let me tell you the significance of this podcast, this video right here, this interview is that you are the first person we're interviewing for the podcast.
Yes,
so it's strategic because we want you to be a woman because almost everybody in this part of the team are guys, and it's just right that we have a lady first, and as a gentleman that I am. I don't know if I'm a gentleman, but yeah. So, Clementine Wallop, ladies and gentlemen, Director of Sub-Saharan Africa Horizon Engage. Hope I didn't murder that. Thank you for coming. Thank you for answering our call when we called you. Hopefully, we'll be calling you more and you'll be answering us.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. Thank you very, very much for your time. And it's always a pleasure to discuss Niger, always a pleasure to discuss industry. And I'm looking forward to continuing our dialogue next time in Lagos.
Awesome, awesome.